When we Marvel fans see these two logos pop up one after another, we definitely get very excited. And so when this article by Stephen Totillo yesterday of GameFile began to circulate and gain a lot of steam, talking about the fact that Brian Horton, who was a creative director and named creative director of Marvel's Wolverine, has left the building and has actually now jumped ship from the PlayStation side of things over to the Perfect Dark video game and is working with Xbox. A lot of people immediately started to sound the alarm and say, oh my goodness, what the heck is going on with Marvel's Wolverine? It must be a disaster. Are there changes being made? What the heck is going on? I saw a lot of people freaking out, saying that this would delay the game, that this would create tons of problems behind the scenes, so on and so forth. Now, to be fair, Stephen Totillo did say in his article itself, saying the changes atop the Wolverine development team are the result of creative decisions around the game. The two sources told GameFile, which is of course the publication that Stephen Totillo writes for. Now, once again, I understand that people are immediately going to get riled up at this and think, oh my goodness, this must mean that there was some sort of a big blow up fight where they disagreed and now the game is kind of in limbo, where the direction that maybe Sony wants to go in going forward and Insomniac is different than what Brian Horton wanted, and so therefore there's this big hoopla and this big development. Well, to be fair, I mean, this is not an unprecedented story. I think that the largest, most infamous version of this story is probably when Amy Hennig left the Naughty Dog company, which of course, once again, interestingly enough, is a PlayStation studio as well, and people were freaking out that Uncharted would be in shambles. People thought that, what is going to happen to Uncharted? Where is it going to go? We're going to get a terrible game. It's going to be a disaster, so on and so forth. And guess what? The Uncharted series is perfectly fine. It went on to be both critically and commercially successful, being helmed by Neil Druckmann. So to me, I just personally don't think that this is something to be worried about yet. Is it a good thing when somebody who's so high up the totem pole just kind of departures quietly because of quote-unquote creative differences? No. Ideally, you would want to have the level of continuity from beginning to end of someone who's in a creative and a higher up role. But I also don't think that this is something that you need to freak out about and think that the game is immediately going to be of worse quality because of this departure. Now, one thing that I will say that seems to be kind of overlooked as part of this entire article, because everyone is really either talking about the fact that Brian Horton left from PlayStation to Xbox and doing the typical, console war conversations, or talking about the fact that a creative director leaving is going to be a problem for the game. But in the article, there's another really important piece of information that a lot of people seem to just completely omit or overlook, because yes, it does confirm that there is a new person in Brian Horton's job, which will be Marcus Smith. But in addition to that, it actually confirms that we have a brand new game director as well. So not just a creative director, but a game director for Marvel's Wolverine, because as far as I know, publicly, they've confirmed multiple times that Cameron Christian was the one that was going to be game directing Marvel's Wolverine. Well, that seems like that is no longer the case either, because he's actually moved on to some other position or role inside of Insomniac. However, we do have the confirmation that Mike Daly will be working as the game director for Marvel's Wolverine going forward. Now, Marcus Smith and Mike Daly have actually worked as a duo before on the most recent Ratchet and Clank game, which I thought was excellent. So I do think that, quote unquote, the game is in good hands. Hopefully they can do an excellent job with Marvel's Wolverine, but it is definitely interesting to see such a big shakeup at the very top of Marvel's Wolverine's creative process. And one thing that I do think we as gamers need to be honest about is that the vast majority of us don't actually have an idea of what a game director actually does. Because I think we assume that it is essentially the same parallel to a movie director role, which it might very well be, because for example, like when we go to the movies and we see a Christopher Nolan movie, we see a Christopher Nolan movie. Like, I understand that there's hundreds, sometimes thousands of people involved with a movie like The Dark Knight, but at the end of the day, it's his vision. That's what you're going to see when you sit down in the movie theater. I don't know if that's the same or if it's true for game directors as well. Now, if the answer to that question is yes, like when we play a video game, at the end of the day, yes, there's hundreds, sometimes thousands of people involved in making the game, but the final vision and the final approval is that of the game director, if that's true, then yes, this story is actually a pretty big deal because you've essentially scrapped one director's vision for another. I don't know whether or not that is how game directing works and if it actually is parallel to filmmaking, but it is definitely something to consider. But as I always say, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to leave a like. You can always voice your opinions and thoughts down in the comment section below. What do you think of this shift at the very top of the Marvel's Wolverine project? Is this something that you're worried about? Is this something that you simply don't care about? You're like, hey, I just want the game to come out. I don't really care who's working on it, who's making it, whatever. Let me just play the game. Or maybe you're somewhere in between where you're interested in the video game making process and you're definitely somewhat curious about how this might affect the project as a whole, but you're not overly worried because, again, if we look at things like Amy Hennig leaving Naughty Dog as kind of a benchmark, you can see that just because a high-up person leaves a project, it does not mean that the project will then be terrible. And of course, before I say goodbye, I will always wish you guys to have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day, and I will indeed hopefully see you guys here on the next one. Peace out, see you laters, alligators.